at the meeting in Lima, Peru, that basically said that countries with migrant-friendly, in other words, diversity-friendly policies will do better economically in the medium to long term than those who don't. Now, on the European question, I think Europe is, going through a transitional phase, and we're very pro-Europe. All 28 members of the European Union are members of IOM. But they're facing three problems. One is what I referred to earlier, refugee amnesia. We've forgotten. Our organization, IOM, and UNHCR, we were joined at the hip in 1951 for one purpose, to take Europeans, all these different groups you talked about, ravaged by the Second World War, to safe shores and new lives. Last year was the 60th anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution. You remember? 200,000 Hungarians fled to open arms, open hearts, open pocketbooks in Austria and former Yugoslavia. So that's number one. The second problem is the dysfunctionality of the Union on such questions, although the Commission and the Council are really trying hard. But if you have a train going under tracks and the wheels have fallen off some of the wagons, you don't make much progress. And the third one is an interesting one. I think we were talking about. Psychologically, Europe has peopled the world for 3 centuries. Colonies everywhere, business, and now multinationals, etc. So they were a continent of origin. Today, given the demographic challenge, the demographic deficit in the north, and the demographic surplus in the global south, they've become a continent of destination. And that changes everything, because you've been used to sending your people out rather than bringing other people in. I guess the other change is the challenges we face are to change the migration narrative. It's currently toxic. And to do that, we have to come back. We all have to do a better job of storytelling. Let the migrants tell their stories. My country, our country, yours and mine, was built on the backs of migrants with the brains and the talent of migrants, these same people who struggle to get to a place, motivated, eager to work, and wanting to contribute. Right now, we're robbing migrants of their dignity, we're putting them in danger, and we're depriving ourselves of their contribution. So I think this is our issue.
I have a story. Because, of course, we need to talk about emotions. And, by the way, a day in the life of a refugee was a very emotional experience here in Davos.
How many of you went to that, saw that, experienced that?
Oh, you should.
Okay. Tell them why they should.
You should, because then you will change your mind about what is it to go through terrible things, and what does it mean to be a refugee. And I don't want to tell you more, but please go. My story is about human trafficking that we experienced in Morocco. We worked for 2 years in a forest camp with Médecins Sans Frontières. And we have a transmission point in Morocco for the Nigerian mafia for prostitution. And they take the women from Nigeria, they stock them in the forest. And when I went there to visit the camp, I couldn't believe it, because I saw like 300 women, and all the women were pregnant 8 months. So I said to the people, but what's going on? And they told me, in order to go to Spain and not to be sent back, they have to be pregnant 8 months. So the gang were reproducing a real terror implementation. You had the chief, you have the major, you have everybody, and you have the dog. And after the dog, you have the women. So I said, but why is the dog so important? They said, because he prevents when the Moroccan policy will arrive. So they closed everything and they hired. And I said to myself, but what are they hiding in their country to go through all that experience?
This is, I think I'm the only faith leader on the stage here. Let me make one comment about that. This notion of otherness, how we treat the other, really is a test of faith. in most of our traditions, how we treat the other. And back home now, we have this crisis because so many people are afraid. And so next week, we're going to launch a project from the faith community. Matthew 25, the Gospel of Matthew, 25th chapter, is the words of Jesus where you might remember he says, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked, I was sick, I was a stranger, immigrant, I was in prison. And how you treat those people is how you treat me, he says in that text. So we're launching this Matthew 25 pledge and project to protect vulnerable people, and it focuses on 3 groups in great danger right now after today, after the inauguration. One is undocumented immigrants, people who are undocumented. 11 million people in the U.S., 11 million are undocumented. And President Obama gave these young people, through executive order, protection. 700,000 turned in their names and now are working as young people, and they're undocumented. Now they're in great danger of being deported, having their families broken up. Second is young people who are in danger from police in their communities, young people of color. And so they're the second group that are most fearful, black pastors, black parents being afraid for their children. Third is Muslims who have been demonized in this election, who have been threatened with banning and registration. And so you've got now people saying to this new government, if you arrest and try and deport these 11 million people, you're going to have to arrest many of them in our churches, in our seminaries, in our home. We're going to take them in and provide sanctuary. You'll have to arrest them in our homes and churches. 2, to the police question, clergy will be going to local police and saying, we want to help you with community policing, not the militarized kind, but if you do racialized policing, as you saw in all those cities, we will hold you accountable as clergy. We'll watch you, we'll film you, we'll record you, and we'll hold you accountable. And if they, with Muslims, if they indeed call for registration, which is frighteningly possible of Muslims in America, you'll have priests, pastors, and rabbis being the first in line in those registration lines. So this is a policy of resistance against what could happen to those people. So you'll hear about that next week, this taking a text, gospel text, Matthew 25 pledge and project to protect those who are vulnerable. And then what happens is when we begin to get close to people who are vulnerable, they change us, as you've heard. Their stories change us and how we think, and that motivates us to go further. I think we are ready to open this up. 5 more minutes, okay. When we talk about these huge policy issues, migration, immigration, refugees, and underneath there's this, I would say, almost spiritual question of otherness and who the others are. You all on the panel, you're all actors, you're activists, you are working on these issues. What is it that you, when people in this kind of an audience, when they listen to what you're saying, what is it that you most want them, hope that they begin to do or say? How do you want people to act who hear this kind of conversation? Let's just go down the aisle. What are you hoping for? Why do you come and speak to me? What do you hope to see them do?
Sensibilize to testimony, seeing what they are passing through. We are a voice, maybe to be a voice and let you decide whether you want to interact, if you want to understand, if you want to resist also. Maybe we'll have an appointment later on. Just listen.
Mm-hmm. I think I think the more you can help migrants to have access to tell their own story. We have a campaign now called I Am a Migrant. We've recorded probably at least 500 migrants recorded their story. You can go to our website and see these, at the contribution they're making, how they feel about it. Secondly, the way you vote is very important, because politicians, rather than helping people to deal with their fears about the other, are actually exploiting those fears to be elected and reelected. And migration is not something that gets you elected these days, and it should, because migration contributes to your society. Those are two things you can do, and try to help us to change the public narrative, and try to help us, if you can, to learn to embrace diversity. It's good for us.
Abdullahi.
I would say give a listening ear. If somebody is telling you their experiences, let them live in that experience. Do not delegitimize their truth and the narratives and the experiences that they have. I also want to say that it's also very important that we have open and public discussions about these issues. There is a difference between race and racism. It's okay to speak about race and the subjects that come around that. If it becomes this taboo subject, it goes underground. And anytime a subject goes underground, it usually manifests and comes back to the surface in a much uglier form. So it's okay, and if you want to have public discussions, it's very, very easy to do so in today's tech-savvy world.
Simone.
Well, I'd like to quote Nelson Mandela, who said something like, "Nobody is born to hate. Hate is something that we have to learn as humans." So I think it's important to give people a chance, recognize that everybody has human rights, inalienable human rights. You don't have to earn those human rights. They are ours. Changing our perspective can come from having an open ear for migrants and listening to them, and I believe that in that way we can change the future.
Mahina?
I think for me there are two things. One is that just put yourself in the other's shoes. That really is one of the most important things we can do. And the second thing is the fact that, and I think just would like us all to leave with the fact that even though we are talking now today about Europe, maybe a bit of Australia and the United States, this otherness issue and this phobia, if you wish, against migrants and others is a global trend. It's not just in Europe and Australia. Where I'm from in Kenya, we have a real phobia with Somalis, who are as African as we are. When the Somali people run away from Somalia, we put them in camps, and the largest refugee camp in the world is in Kenya. And it's something that's very un-African. And it's interesting to hear you, sir, about how religious leaders are coming together, because where I'm from, the Christian leaders have absolutely nothing to do with the refugees who are Somali or from South Sudan, and they are part of the problem as opposed to being part of the solution. So and we know, of course, what's going on in Burma with the Rohingyas and the Burmese majority. So it's across the world, and I think the thing we need to figure out is, why is it that we as human beings have this intolerance against those who may look different, may worship differently, may have different views? And this whole idea of fundamentalists, it's okay to disagree, it's okay to be different, but do I have to finish you off because you're different?
My comment would be responding to Abdullahi, the difference in race and racism, very important. I call racism America's original sin, because we just didn't do slavery. That had been done before. We said, it was the Christians, speaking of how faith can be on the wrong side, Christians who said, you can't do what we are doing to indigenous people, taking their land and their lives, and kidnapped Africans, making them into chattel property. You can't do that to people who are made in the image of God. Genesis chapter 1. So we have to say they weren't really made in the image of God. They're not fully human. We have to throw away this notion